Hello and welcome back to episode 2. This time I need to apologise for the bangs and crashes that might be in the background because both my children are now at home, and thankfully my dad is decorating upstairs for me, but this is the quietest room in the house I can find, so I'm going to do my best. So on to episode 5, the Patent Office strikes back. So now that we've got to know each other a little better, key fact you need to know about me is I love Star Wars. As I said before, if you would like to contact me to ask any questions, please do link in with me. Details are given on the screen. I would love to hear from you. So last time in episode 4, we took a look at what can and can't be patented and where patents can be obtained. So today I'm going to go on to look at how much does it cost to get a patent and how long does it take, how long do patents last, why bother in the first place, and do you need to hire an expert? So let's get down to the brass tacks. How much does it cost? So the first example that I'm going to talk through is the example of filing a patent application in the UK and taking that application all the way through to grant. Now the first thing you need to do is get your patent application written, so that's going to be happening before you file your patent application, obviously. So on my timeline on the left there, I've shown that as T minus 0 to minus 6 months approximately. Here your patent attorney really comes to the fore in terms of writing your patent application so that the claims capture your invention in such a way as not to be too limited, in which case your patent would be easily worked around by potential competitors. They might be able to do something which isn't quite the same and perhaps not quite as good as what you've done, but it might work, it might be cheaper, and might not be so good, in which case it could damage your reputation. So definitely you need to be getting yourself a patent attorney to, at the very least, draft your patent application for you. On the right hand side there, I've shown an indicative cost of between £5,000 to £15,000. That will depend very much upon the complexity of the invention. If you've been tinkering around in your garage, for example, and you've come up with a simple mechanical invention, then I would expect much more towards the lower end of that range. But if you're working in pharma, biotech, computer implemented inventions, then you're probably going to be looking at paying much more towards the upper end of that scale. But these are very much finger in the air figures only, and just intended as an indication of the sorts of prices you might be looking to pay for patent drafting. Once your patent has been written, you can then file it at the UK Intellectual Property Office. So on the left hand side there, that is T minus 0. If you remember from the last video, that's your priority date, from which everything else moves on. Fortunately in the UK, the official fees here are very low. It's only £210 for your filing fee and search fee. And then your agent's probably going to be charging you somewhere in the region of £1,000 to perhaps £2,000. £2,000 would really be quite expensive, perhaps more mid that range. Once your patent application is on file, then you will just wait until you receive your search report from the Patent Office, and an examiner will take your application, look at the claims, look at the breadth of those claims, and search the prior art and let you know about anything which they consider to be relevant to the novelty or inventive step of your idea. It's not necessary to respond to the search report. You can if you want to, but ordinarily people just take the results of the search report, satisfy themselves that there's nothing there which is going to prevent them obtaining a patent, perhaps satisfying their potential investors of that, and perhaps getting an idea of the breadth of protection you're likely to get at the end of it all. So then we move on to the 12-month stage. As you'll remember from the last video, that's the end of the priority year. So if you want patent protection in other countries around the world, you need to file in those countries, or more ordinarily, people will file an international patent application, a PCT application, in order to buy themselves another year and a half before they have to start making those sorts of decisions. So moving on then to 18 months from your filing date, your patent application will publish. Now, this isn't grant of your application, it's literally publication of the application as filed. There's something called the patent bargain, which is the government giving you a 20-year monopoly, 20 years from filing, for your invention in return for full disclosure of your invention. So rather than you keeping it secret, the government is the intention is to for you to publish all the details of your invention, such that somebody skilled in the art could actually do your invention, make your invention, whatever, use your invention, with the idea that that will take technology and innovation forward. So what's critical for you to understand is it is not possible to get a patent without full publication of your idea at 18 months after filing. If you have filed in other countries around the world, because they will all be dated from your priority date, all of the publications, wherever you have filed, will all happen at 18 months from the priority date, so they will all happen together. In the UK, publication of the application at 18 months kicks off a 6-month deadline in which you have to request examination and pay the examination fee, so that takes us to 24 months or 2 years. Again, in the UK, the official fee is quite low, it's only £100 currently, and your patent attorney will probably be charging you in the region of somewhere between £100 and £200 for requesting examination for you. Now, I should note that you can actually pay the search fee and examination fee together on filing, and that will mean that you will receive a search and examination report earlier, certainly for the exam report earlier, maybe even before publication. Some people do choose to do that, but I have to say in my career, I think generally speaking, I've seen more people follow this route, where they file, get a search report, wait until the 2-year stage and then pay the exam fee. That's more normal, in my view. So once you've paid your exam fee, you will probably wait somewhere between 6 to 12 months before you receive your first examination report, in which the examiner will take a look at the prior art which was cited in the search report and make or not objections against your application. Perhaps they don't think it's new, perhaps they don't think it's inventive, and you will be required to respond to that examination report. So looking at the box to the right of the Receive Examination Report box, this is where your patent attorney will review the prior art that's been cited in detail and come up with suitable arguments and amendments for overcoming the objections. Now, it can be that this cycle of events will go on 2, 3, 4 times, where you get an examination report from the Patent Office and you need to respond with argumentation or amendments. Very often the argument is around inventive step, which, if you remember from episode 4, was I said it was extremely subjective, and we as patent attorneys do spend a lot of time going back and forth over what is and what isn't inventive in view of the cited prior art. It is possible that there'll only be one round of examination. That can be quite common, particularly if you're willing to narrow down your application earlier in order to achieve grant. But if you want something as broad as possible, you may be looking at 2 or 3 rounds of examination. In terms of cost, depending on the complexity, you might be looking at £1,000 to £5,000 per round of examination. Realistically, that cost should decrease towards the lower end of that range for each round you go through, because the arguments should be becoming more clearer and more focused on a particular issue. But that sort of range is correct from the first round to the last round, I would say. Once you've satisfied the examiner that your patent claims are novel and inventive, they will issue a notification of grant and your patent will be granted. In the UK, there are no grant fees or print fees, so you'll just be given a date, and on that date, the patent will be granted. In most countries, UK included, you have to pay renewal fees annually in order to keep your patent in force. In the UK, the renewal fees are due from the 4th anniversary of filing up to the 19th anniversary of filing in respective year 20, and they range from around about £70 for the first year up to £610 for the last year, increasing with the age of the patent. And if you're using your patent attorney or a renewal payment service, you'll probably be paying a service charge of around £100 to £200 per payment for that. In terms of timing, in the UK, ordinarily you need to get everything completed and your patent granted by 4.5 years from your priority date. That deadline doesn't necessarily exist in other territories around the world, and it can take longer, perhaps up to 8 or 9 years. But in the next video, in episode 6, I'm going to talk a little bit about why early grant perhaps doesn't matter to you very much. And then, as I mentioned earlier, a patent is valid for 20 years from filing, provided all the renewal fees are paid. So now I wanted to take you through an example of timings and costs for your other applications in other countries. So you'll recall that at T equals 12 months, if we look at the left-hand side there at the top, if you want to file in other countries, you either need to do that directly, but more commonly you'll file an international patent application or a PCT, which claims priority from your UK filing. Now, you could drop your UK at this point if you wanted to, in which case you could re-enter the UK later on. I can talk about that later. But typically people will continue with their UK in parallel with this international procedure. A reason for dropping the UK might, for example, be that you've actually added more information into the patent application since your UK was filed, and you might want to make sure that that new information goes into the new application in the UK, which can be done via this route. I should say very, very clearly that the new information will not have the benefit of the earlier priority date. Only the originally disclosed information will have that benefit. So if there has been publication since you filed and it covers your new information, then that new information will not be new, will not be novel. But that aside, and not wanting to complicate matters too much, assuming the two applications are identical to one another, at 12 months you can file your international patent application with official fees in the region of €3,000. You can see that's considerably more expensive than the UK official fees I was talking about in the previous slide, and attorney fees of around about £1,000 to £2,000. As I was discussing, there may have been changes in the 12 months and you may want to amend your application, in which case you're going to be paying an hourly rate for your patent attorney to rewrite your patent draft for you. And of course, the price of that will just depend on how extensive the changes are, and you'll be paying, your attorney's rate, which could be, £200, £300, £400 an hour, depending on who's working for you. So really the main purpose of filing an international application is to buy yourself another 18 months before you have to make the decision of which countries you'd like to take your application into, and really start incurring very large costs, certainly cumulatively very large costs. But you do also receive another search report and a patentability opinion from the International Searching Authority. That can be very useful. As I said, I think in the previous video, it can just turn up the same prior art as the UK search did, but often other prior art will turn up. Patent applications are nothing if not slippery beasts. So again, you and your potential investors, whoever might be interested, will have a better idea of the patentability, likely success, likely scope of protection, etc., etc. Now, as I mentioned in the previous slide, at 18 months from the priority date, all of your pending applications will publish. So your UK application will publish, and now you've bought yourself an international application that will publish too at 18 months from the priority date. Your international patent application then ordinarily will just sit there until you reach 30 months or 2.5 years from filing, at which point you have to separate the application into the various different countries or regions that you want to go ahead in. And actually, annoyingly, I've realised I haven't put my T equals 30 months on that slide. I do apologise for that. But on the box where we are dividing into separate national regional applications, that is happening at 30 months from your priority date. So looking at costs, as a very finger in the air guide, you'll be looking at paying £1,500 to £4,000 plus official fees to each country that you want to file a new patent application in, plus agents fees of around about £1,000 to £2,000. So you can quickly see that if you want to go ahead in a lot of countries or a lot of regions, those costs can add up very, very quickly. It's really imperative that you have some source of funding by this 30-month stage. So more or less now, we could go back and look at the previous slide and follow that procedure through, and it would more or less apply to each country. So you would possibly receive a new search report, not always, but you'll definitely receive exam reports which will raise objections or not as to whether or not your patent can be granted in that country, and you will need to work with a local attorney in each country, ordinarily through your UK patent attorney, in order to achieve grant in that country. So again, the costs on the previous slide are probably relevant for each round of examination in each country. Again, you can see here that the costs are really growing exponentially. So as I've just mentioned, it's absolutely imperative that you have a source of funding, that you understand how much you're going to be spending, and that you have a strategy in place for your spending, and good logic behind which countries you're going into and why. And I'm going to talk more about that in a moment. Just mention here, I mentioned on the previous slide, in the UK you have to pay renewal fees after grant. There are some countries which actually charge maintenance fees before grant. Europe as a region is an example of that, and Canada is a region of that. Is an example of that. But most countries don't. So other than obviously paying for your rounds of examination and getting through to grant, that should be the only costs that come up in that time. So on our timescale axis on the left again, from around 3 to 6 years, you're probably going to start seeing your patents being granted. As I mentioned before, perhaps longer. 3 would be incredibly quick, but you never know. And you should grant eventually in different countries at different times. It looks like there that it would all happen at the same time, but it's entirely country dependent. As I mentioned before, the UK doesn't charge grant and printing fees, but some countries do. To be honest, they're not that expensive, perhaps up to £1,000. More if you require translations, as you do in Europe. But a ballpark would be, official fees of around £1,000. So in my example here, we've gone directly into 2 countries, country 1 and country 2, and we've also gone into region 1, which in this case we'll say is Europe. Europe is a granting authority, so you can go through the entire process up to grant as a single patent application. But once the application is granted by the European Patent Office, you then need to divide it into separate national patents in each country that you want to have patent protection in Europe. You have to do that within 3 months of grant, otherwise the opportunity to have the patent in that country goes away. The cost of validating your granted patent in each country varies tremendously, to be honest. You need to pay official fees, again cheap in the UK and expensive in other countries. I think Germany is quite expensive, but don't quote me on that, I might be wrong. Normally you'll be paying agents fees in each country to do that for you, and some countries have fairly heavy translation requirements, so you might be looking at paying sort of anywhere up to £4,000 if you need to translate the whole application. But there are an awful lot of countries that only require translations of the claims, so perhaps more in the region of £500 is going to be what you're looking at. But of course, you're going to look very closely, very strategically at which countries you're going to need protection in Europe, and not just be heavy-handed and choose everything, because it will cost a living fortune and you probably don't need to anyway. So as before, every country then will require the payment of renewal fees. They are typically required annually, although the USA is different in that regard. I think from memory they require, I think it's 4.5 years, 9 years and 12 years. I could be wrong about that as well. I'm not an expert in renewal fees, but it is something like that. And then your final renewal fee takes you all the way out to the end in the States. But generally it's annual renewal fees, which is good, because you should be reviewing your patent portfolio annually and making sure that you're not paying for anything you don't need, cut the dead wood. And then again, 20 years from your original filing date in the UK, your priority date, is the term of patent protection. So let's just look quickly at a few issues which might arise. The first is that a patent application can only relate to one invention. You might be surprised when you originally talk to your patent attorney that what you have made actually involves 3 separate innovations. So it's really important to understand that and to come up with your patent strategy accordingly together with your attorney. This is a very strict rule and something that you're going to have to live with. Sometimes it doesn't become clear that there are 2 or more inventions present until after you've received the search report, because what you've done, the clever bit that you've done, might actually go in a number of different directions after a particularly close piece of prior art has been found, for example. If that does happen and you want to protect all aspects of your invention, then you can divide your pending patent applications into 1 or more divisional patent applications, provided that's done before grant. But that will exactly double or treble your costs depending on how many applications you file. So they're extremely useful, but need to be budgeted for and costed out very carefully. So it's clear that obtaining patents can very quickly become a very expensive business. Now, I'm definitely not trying to put you off here. I'm just trying to make sure that if you go down this road, you go to it with your eyes wide open. So I think my key points are: it's fine to self-fund or perhaps seed fund an original patent application through the UK up to the first 12 months, perhaps even self-fund the filing of an international patent application at 12 months, but certainly by the 30-month stage, by the 2.5-year stage, you're going to need to know how you're going to be paying for your patents and making sure that you are strategically deciding where best to get protection. So in terms of that question then, how do you choose which territories to protect yourself in? When I'm working with first-time patent applicants who've never been through the process before, I very, very commonly hear that, I need patent protection everywhere. Well, that is absolutely never true. What you need to do is to protect your main markets and protect where you can afford. There's no point spending loads and loads of money trying to get protection everywhere and then just running out of money and not being able to obtain anything significant anywhere. So protect your main markets. Where are you going to be making your money? You want to maximize your profits for what you spent on obtaining patents. And then even if somebody does copy you, you have the lion's share of the business, and the countries and territories which are left may not even be worth their while to copy you. So you may have full coverage, full protection in reality, even when you've only obtained patents in a certain number of countries. A common worry is that, if you have a product, for example, and you've only got a patent in the UK, well, what happens if that product is manufactured out in China, for example, and imported in? Will my patent protect me? Well, it will, because patents protect unlicensed imports. So you don't need to worry about that in the country that you have protection in. If you have more money to spend and you are willing, then yes, absolutely consider obtaining patents also in the countries where your product is made or used. Difficult if it's a process patent. for manufacturing something, because obviously then you're going to have to protect where it's used. But certainly if it's a product type patent, then you might want to consider protecting where the product will be made. You do have to have a consideration for how well respected patent rights are in the country of manufacture. Now, patent rights are getting much stronger globally, and foreign countries are having more success in enforcing their rights in the countries where things tend to be manufactured. But it must be a consideration for you whether or not it's worthwhile getting patent protection in those countries. Also considering really your appetite for enforcing your patents in those countries. And I'm going to talk about enforcement more in the next video in episode 6. So I mentioned in a previous slide that it's possible you'll take your idea along to your patent attorney and they will tell you that actually there's three separate inventions here. Well, then how do you decide what to protect and where and how? With your patent attorney, you can work together to identify what really are the absolutely core concepts that hang everything together, and then what are perhaps the more peripheral things. And you might look to file more broadly and gain broader protection for the real core ideas, and perhaps not file so broadly for the more peripheral aspects. So I really like this infographic here. I think it shows really nicely that, yes, of course, patents can be very expensive, but that doesn't mean that they're not value for money, provided they are obtaining for you an advantage in the marketplace. So all of your patent spend must be strategic. Make sure that jigsaw works for you. So just a few more key points that I'd like to mention, which people are often not aware of. Firstly, patents are always vulnerable to attack throughout their whole life. Once they're granted, it doesn't mean you're home free. If a competitor wants to use your product or process and is determined to cause you as much problems as possible, they can go away, do some more prior art searching and actually apply to have your patent revoked. So just to be aware that they are always vulnerable right up to the end. Therefore, make sure that you have really robust fallback positions in your patent application. You cannot add any new information into a patent application after it's been filed for that information to also benefit from the priority date. I did say earlier that up to the 12-month stage, you could potentially add improvements in, but they wouldn't take the priority date. Generally, what you want to remember is that you can't add any new information. So you must make sure that when your patent attorney, and your patent attorney will make sure of this, when your patent is first drafted, that every single fallback position that you can possibly think of is included. Quite often clients of mine will get the first draft of their patent application back if they've never been through the process before and say, hey Gemma, why on God's name have you described all of these things that we would never ever do? It's ridiculous. And some people have in the past got quite shirty, at which point I've had to explain very politely that the reason I've done it is to make sure that the patent description covers the breadth of the invention that I've claimed in the claims, and also to include as many fallback positions as we can think of, because you never know what's going to be valuable to you in the future. And in a similar vein to the fact that you can't add information into a patent application after it's been filed, that therefore means that you cannot amend to include anything which isn't disclosed in the application as filed. So again, it's imperative that everything you need to be in there as far as humanly possible is in there at filing. So the next question is, why bother? If it's going to be so expensive, it's going to take so long, it's going to be vulnerable to attack for its whole life, why would I even bother? Well, I think most people know that a patent is a monopoly, and you might want to choose to make and sell your own product or use your own process or whatever it might be, and just simply hold the monopoly and keep everybody else off your turf. But realistically, I think the majority of money that is made from patent monopoly rights is through licenses. You might use your technology yourself and offer licenses out to other people to also use it, perhaps in different markets, potentially, different applications. That can often happen. You might decide that at this point you just want to exit and all you want to do is earn money from the patent, so you can just license it off and not use it yourself. You might not need to, particularly if it's technology you're not using or no longer pursuing, then your patent can still earn money for you. I'm going to talk about this more in the next video, but you might find yourself in the situation where you want to use somebody else's technology which is patented, but they might be interested in your technology, in which case you can cross-license, so no need to be paying somebody else license fees. You might offer an exclusive license, which is good if you really want to exit stage left, as it were, in which case you are licensing your patent to somebody else to the exclusion of everybody, including yourself, so you wouldn't be able to use your invention. That also gives your licensee the right to enforce the patent. Another type of license is a sole license, where you have only one licensee and also you can continue using the invention. Good reason for licensing is that you can share some of the costs, perhaps the cost of obtaining the patents in the first place, because you can license pending patent applications. They don't need to be granted. Again, I'll talk about that more next time. But also things like renewal fees, perhaps looking at any attacks which come to the patent and its validity from third parties. You perhaps have an ally there. But also, let's take a look at some of the non-monetary reasons that you might be wanting to get involved in patents. And I think a really key one is to get a seat at the table, at the negotiation table. If you have technology and it's not patented, or perhaps you want to use somebody else's technology, but you don't want to pay through the nose for it, then if you have your own deck of playing cards, as it were, to counter somebody else's deck of playing cards or their patents and patent applications, then you can actually start to have a solid negotiation from a position of strength. Without your patents, you might not even be invited to that negotiation at all. You might find people using your technology anyway. Perhaps they've reverse engineered and found out how it works. So that, a really key reason for protecting yourself is so that you can go and have the conversations with the people and the companies that you need to from a position of strength. Also, companies are often valued based on their patent portfolios, how much they've got. That might be very important for you. Reputationally, it might be very important if you're an innovation company. And then finally, perhaps a more subtle point, which is to prevent other people patenting your ideas. If you have had, let's say you had a conversation with somebody, even if you thought it was confidential, even if it was confidential, that doesn't stop them going off and filing their own patent application for your ideas. You would then have to sue them to get anything back from that situation, and you may not have the time or money or managerial time, and experience to do that. So by filing your own patent application, straight away you're protecting from that scenario. Alternatively, somebody else just might invent the same thing as you and patent it, in which case you're going to be relying on prior user rights, which are extremely limited, and not something you want to find happening to you. If you have new and innovative technology that your business is based on, potentially you could just file your patent application and go up to the publication stage and then withdraw if you actually didn't really want the patent, but you do want to get it out into the public domain, making it prior art. If somebody else files a patent application for the same idea, you've at least ensured that they won't be able to get the patent because you've deliberately destroyed the novelty. So, do you need to hire an expert? Now, I'm sure you're all thinking, well, of course you're going to say, yes, you do. But I quite like this picture here because this is, at first sight, not obviously wrong until you realise it just wouldn't work. And that is a good analogy for a self-filed patent application which has been written by somebody who's not an expert. It might look like a good patent application on the face of it with all the right parts, but actually when you try and use it, it doesn't work. You've forgotten something, the claims are too narrow, you haven't included everything you needed to, and you're going to get into a big old mess. If your technology and the rights in your technology are important to you and your business, or perhaps you want to sell your rights to somebody else and just make money that way, your value is entirely in how well and how written and how robust your patent application is and your patent is. So if you're being serious, then yes, you really do need an expert. So I'm just going to labour those points again for you. If you try yourself, you are almost certainly going to get it very wrong. You probably won't realise that until it's far too late. The key really is budgeting for your professional advice, budgeting for your patent costs as a fundamental part of your business planning and your patent budget planning. You have been warned. So hi, I'm back. This is my absolute favourite infographic for obvious reasons. Going to be covered in the next video in episode 6, the fact that patent rights are defensive and it's up to you to defend your rights. Nobody else is going to do it for you. So I'll see you then. Bye.